so I make sure I'm on track. Apparently, you don't start till I say go. Charlie told me to have fun with this, and I said, but I'm talking about education funding. And he said, some people think that's really fun. So, okay, here goes. Are you ready? All right, and go. This past June, when our governor signed a new state budget into law, he changed how much funding is distributed to California schools, as well as how that funding is divided up amongst the more than 1,000 school districts that we have across the state. Up until that point, school districts were funded by a complicated system in which they would receive one chunk of general purpose funding and more than 50 other smaller chunks that had to be spent in certain ways. Those 50 smaller chunks were known as categorical funds. So here's how this worked. Imagine that you and some friends are planning a dinner party. You agree what kind of dishes you want to make, and then your friends send you to the grocery store to pick up and pick out the ingredients that you think you'll need. They give you one envelope with some money in it, about enough to cover half of what you need to buy, and they say, you can spend this however you want. Then they also hand you a bunch of smaller envelopes that have specific labels on them. So there's $4.72 for portobello mushrooms, $82 for water or Pepsi but no Coke, and $13.19 for any kind of squash you might want as long as it doesn't have the color green in it. Now, you might find these specifications helpful. If you don't know a lot about cooking or you're the kind of person who likes guidelines, you might find them annoying if you realize you don't have enough money for the squash or you really don't like squash anyway and would like to buy yams. But either way, when you're standing at the checkout line, if you feel confident and supported or feel annoyed, you have to agree that the process of paying for the food and keeping track of how much money is going in and out of those envelopes is kind of complicated. It's so complicated, in fact, it might get in your way of actually cooking your meal. Now, starting this year, that system of funding has changed thanks to the local control funding formula. Now, school districts will still receive a certain amount of base general purpose funding that's calculated based on their student population, just as they did before. And that amount of money is projected to increase steadily over the next 8 years. But here's the big change. All of those 50 other envelopes or categorical funds, they have been collapsed into one big pot of supplemental money that is distributed solely based on student need. So, the more low-income, English language learning, and foster youth a district serves, the more supplemental funding it will get. And it gets to decide how to spend the money. So to go back to the dinner party, instead of 50 envelopes now, you just have 2. One is based on the number of guests you expect to serve, and the other accounts for all of their own dietary preferences or restrictions that you need to work around so they all get a good meal. Best of all, you get to decide what you want to buy. But you do not just get to run out to the store without a plan. The trade-off here is flexibility for accountability. School districts have to submit a plan that explains how they're going to use the funds to meet 8 different priority areas. Those priorities include complying with existing regulations around teacher credentialing and facilities, increasing parent engagement, increasing student engagement by targeting dropout rates and chronic absenteeism, making sure that all students have access to a broad course of study that includes, you guessed it, the arts. So why is this a really big deal? First of all, it is a huge victory for equity. We are on the heels of a recession that crippled our education system, and those students that needed the most support were arguably hit the hardest. The fact that all school districts are getting more money is a good thing. The fact that those that have the highest need populations are getting the most money is a great thing. Second of all, this emphasis on flexibility allows us to rethink what we mean by school success. School districts will be able to target an array of indicators rather than just focusing on test scores. Those priority areas I mentioned, especially those around parent and student engagement, they have opportunity for the arts written all over them. Now, there are still some things we need to figure out. Education policy has long been a pendulum that swings between local control and central decision-making. Local control, in theory, means more diversity in how problems are solved or even how they're identified. There's a lot about this that sounds great. But we have to be honest with ourselves. Sometimes this makes us uncomfortable. It wasn't too long ago that we scored a big victory in this state with the Art and Music Block Grant included in the state education budget. That was one of those 50-plus categoricals that is now gone. We fight really hard for those line items. It doesn't feel good when they go away. But we have an opportunity now to think critically about how the arts fit into this new, local, holistic vision of school success. While local control was adopted back in June, a lot of the decisions about how this will actually work still have to be made. So we need to start thinking about this now, while remembering that a key impetus here is to keep things flexible. Groups, including ours, we love those categorical line items. School district leaders didn't. And while those categoricals are gone, leaders now have 8 priorities to address. Now, 8 is better than 50, and those 8 are pretty great, but it's still a lot to juggle, and it's an entirely new way of thinking. So arts education programs that can address multiple priorities will thrive in this environment if we do a lot of listening and we're very, very clear and concrete about what we can contribute. There are a lot of groups that can lay claim to helping districts meet those 8 priorities. We need to be clear and confident about what makes us different. I think that one way to do that is to meditate occasionally on those 2 words that drove the adoption of this in the first place: flexibility and equity. How do we meet those ideals in our current work as artists, arts administrators, and arts advocates? How do they manifest in our work already? How do we support an education system that is equitable and flexible? And most of all, what do we need to do as a field to make sure that we are responsive to the challenges and open to the solutions that can come through in this environment? Thank you. Woo! Woo!